So in chapter 19 of Mounce, we are going to talk about the future tense. So this is a brand new tense, and this is how we describe action in the future. So we're going to talk about not what did happen, not what is happening, but what will happen. Okay? So let's take a look at the handout here. We're going to deal first of all with the future active indicative, and then we're going to look at the future middle. And the deponent here could put in parentheses because that is the term that Mounce likes to use to describe these verbs that are middle passive in form, but in our translation value we'll translate them as active in sense anyway. Let's look at the future active indicative first of all. So here's the basics, okay, and I'm summarizing Mounce's chapter here. The Greek future tense uses a different stem than the present tense does. It uses the future active stem. Remember, the root is the most basic form of a verb. The stem is the most basic form of a verb in a particular tense. So each tense will have a tense stem that it uses, and oftentimes that tense stem will be related to the more basic verbal root. Sometimes the different stems will all be the same from one tense to the other, and sometimes the stems will be modified in one tense, and so it'll look slightly different than what you normally see. But the stem for the future is the future active stem, so that's what we're going to be focusing on here. Now the tense formative. Here we're going to meet a little part of the verb that gives it some special meaning. A tense formative is a letter or a couple of letters that provide grammatical information about the tense. Here we're going to use a sigma, and that's going to be attached directly after the verb stem to form the future active stem. The connecting vowels that are going to be used are the ones we've already learned, omicron and omicron and epsilon. Remember our rule here is omicron will come before mu and nu, epsilon everywhere else, okay? So you don't have to learn anything new that way. And then our personal endings are going to be the primary endings because what we're dealing with here are verb forms that are what we call unaugmented. If you've looked at the master verb chart, there is a place to write augments down, and we haven't met one of those tenses yet because the present tense and the future tense are unaugmented tenses. So we don't have to worry about that, but it's the augmented tenses that use the secondary active personal endings. Since this is an unaugmented tense, we're going to be using the primary active personal endings that we've already learned for the present tense. So the good news here is that there's really not a whole lot new to learn in this chapter. All right? If you know your present active indicative, you pretty much know the future with just the modification of adding the sigma tense formative to the stem. So let's take a look at a little diagram. I have lusamen. So the lu part here is my future active stem. Guess what? This future active stem looks exactly like the present stem, doesn't it? So there's no modification of stem here, which is great. There will be some modifications with other forms, we'll see. Here's our sigma tense formative that goes right after the stem. That indicates future time. The connecting vowel is omicron if I start with mu or nu, and men is the one I've chosen. That's the first person plural. So how am I going to translate this? The men is we, lu, loose, sigma, will. So we loose will, which is to say we will loose or we shall loose. All right? Easy peasy. So here's what it's going to look like. Future active stem, lu, tense formative, sigma, connecting vowels depending on our real endings here. So remember, me starts with a mu. That's why my connecting vowel is omicron. But you remember, much of the time me doesn't actually show up. It falls off. And then we're left with the omicron that lengthens, becomes omega. So we're left with so for the sigma omicron. So we get luso. All right. Now, basically, for all intents and purposes, it's going to be the same thing as what results in the present active indicative, oes e amen ete usi, with the sigma in front. Okay? It will look exactly like the present. So let's read the forms together, shall we? Everybody repeat after me. Luso, I will or shall loose. Luces, you will loose. Luce, he, she, it will loose. Lusamen, we will loose or we shall loose. Lucete, y'all will loose. And lususin, they will loose. Now, you heard me translate the first person singular and the first person plural as I shall or will loose, and we will loose. Why am I using shall here?
Because you're translating the King James Version.
This is King James English. Well, basically, that's right. The King James translators spoke proper English. All right? There once was a rule that's not followed anymore in American English. I don't know if the British do this or not, but it used to be that when we do the future tense with first person forms, the proper way was to use shall for I and we, and to use will for you and he, she, it, and they. That distinction has fallen by the wayside for the most part. And nowadays, we tend to reserve shall as a way of commanding people. Yeah, right. Well, exactly. So little Johnny says, I'm not going to clean my room. Oh, you shall clean your room. Okay? So we in older forms of English, to say I shall loose was merely a futuristic thing. It's just saying, tomorrow I shall loose such and such. Okay? There was no volitional idea here where you were indicating your will for something to happen. You're just making a predictive statement. Okay? So I will sometimes follow the old English convention because I like to speak proper English. But I recognize that almost every American says I will and we will.
Is that only used in the first person, or is it actually?
Yeah, the shall rule is really, in terms of the English grammar rules, was reserved for both of the first person forms. And then you and he, she, it was always will. Yep. Okay. Now, when we translate the future, we are going to want to use what Mounce calls the undefined aspect. I call it the perfective aspect, but we're going to use the simple summary snapshot way of referring to a verbal action. So I will loose, not I will be loosing, okay? Do not give your future forms any kind of a progressive notion. They are just the simple summary way of describing the action. So those are our futures. Let's, just for fun, shall we? Let's take another verb like to believe. What's the verb for to believe? Yeah, pistuo, right? So how would I change this from I believe, present, to I shall believe, or I will believe? What am I going to change?
Put it before the connecting vowel.
That's right. Put the sigma for the future right after the stem, and then I add my connecting vowel and personal ending. So pistuso, I shall believe. How would I say you shall believe? Pistuses. That's right. How would I say he, she, or it will believe? Pistuse. See how easy this is? What about we shall believe? Pistu so men. Okay? Right. We do get intervocalic sigma dropping out at times, but it's going to be, we will usually see that happen when it's between a connecting vowel and something else, okay? Here, I mean after a connecting vowel. The sigma is really needed in order for us to know that this is the future tense, isn't it? Yeah. If I dropped it, then it would be a present tense verb form. Okay. Now, for B here, I have variations on a theme, which is just to say we're going to be doing the same thing to form the future of some other types of verbs, but those verbs have some peculiar problems, okay? There are some verbs that have stems that end with stops, or what we call stop consonants. Do you remember your square of stops? We learned that, all right? Anytime I have stop consonants, that consist of what are called the labials, the velars, or the dentals. What are my labial stop consonants? Okay, good. So P, beta, phi. What are my velars? Good. Kappa, gamma, and chi. And then my dentals? Tau, delta, and theta. Technically, it's only these first two columns that are stops. What is a stop consonant? What is that? It's a consonant where the airflow completely stops. P, b, right? K, g. There's a buildup and then the release of air. T, d. The phi, he, and theta, those are not technically stops. They are fricatives. That is to say, they are formed by blowing air through their production. Okay? But it doesn't matter. All of them are going to behave the same way. In the future, if I have a verb whose stem ends with one of these, and then I add a sigma, they are going to behave in these ways. P, beta, or phi plus a sigma is going to produce a psi. Kappa, gamma, chi plus a sigma is going to produce xi. Tau, delta, and theta plus a sigma will produce just a sigma. Remember, the dentals or the teeth fall out. Okay? So when that happens, the future tense formative sigma is going to be obscured by the fact that the sigma is hiding inside that consonant's symbol. You're going to have to sort of peel the onion back and say, okay, going to inspect your heart here. Pull up the shirt, stick the stethoscope over there and say, are you a hidden sigma over here? Okay? So take a look at the word blepo. Blepo means I see in the present. The future stem is blep. And if I want to say I shall see, guess what I have to do? I have to add a sigma to the P. And they're not going to stay like that, are they? They're going to combine to become a psi. Can you all see that? So it's blepso. I shall see or I will see. Blepso. Okay, so say that with me. Blepso. So graph plus sigma is not graphso, but gropso. Everybody, gropso? I will write. Ago is to lead, and I want to say I shall lead. So here I have a velar with a sigma. Agso becomes oxo. Everybody, oxo? So I will lead. Deoko is I am pursuing. And with a sigma for the future, everybody, deoxo. Kappa sigma becomes xi. Deoxo. I will pursue or persecute. Now here is baptid. The present stem, let me jot this down. Baptidzo, okay? Baptids is my present stem. Notice that the stem that I'm using for the future is not the same as the present stem. In all these other situations, it is. And my point is just to say sometimes your future stem's the same as your present stem, and sometimes it is different. Here, it's really baptid, which is the real root of the verb baptizo. Okay, so the real root is being used for the future stem here. And I'm just going to add a sigma to that. Deltas before sigma do what? They drop out. And I'm left with baptizo. Baptizo. I will baptize. Everybody, baptizo? And then the verb patho, I persuade, has a theta for the end of its stem, and thetas before sigma for the future will also fall out. So I'm left with peso. Peso. I know, you're sitting there thinking about Mexico and buying things, right? I'm going to use my peso to persuade you to sell me something. All right, so I will persuade. So when you have these stop consonants at the end of the future stem and they interact with the sigma, you are not going to readily see the future tense formative anymore. What you're going to have to do when you're parsing is try to reason backwards now. I have a psi. This is a sigma preceded by what kind of a consonant? It's got to be a labial, okay, because it's labials plus sigma that produce the psi. And then if you're not sure what that lexical form is when you're parsing it, you got to go, okay, well, my verb is either, it's one of these, it's either blep-o, bleb-o, or blef-o, okay? And then you go through your vocab list in your mind. Okay, do I know a verb called blefo? No. Blebo? No. Blepo? Yeah, that's got a nice ring to it. That's the verb I see. Okay. So that's your stop consonants and how they interact with the sigma. We also learned about contract verbs the other day. And contract verbs have contract vowels at the end of their stems. What are my three contract vowels? Alpha, epsilon, omicron. Okay? And so here's the rule about contract vowels. This is going to be a consistent rule that contract verbs follow over and over and over again. Whenever I have a contract vowel at the end of a stem, and I'm putting it in a tense that uses a tense formative, the contract vowels will always lengthen the short contract vowel to a long vowel before the tense formative. Here's how that lengthening process happens. If my contract vowel is alpha or epsilon, both of them will lengthen to eta. If my contract vowel is an omicron, it will lengthen to omega. So let's take a look at these examples. I have the verb to love, agapao. And my future stem is agapa. I'm going to add a sigma after that stem. And since this is a contract vowel, I've just learned that contract vowels before sigma always do what? They lengthen. What does alpha lengthen to? Lengthens to eta. So agapaso is going to become agapeso. Well, we just keep getting pesos in here, don't we? Agapeso. So you're going to translate that as I will love. Agapeso. Everybody say that. Agapeso. So poet, to do or make. There's my future stem with an epsilon contract vowel. What's it going to do before the sigma? It's got to lengthen as well. What's it become? It likewise becomes an eta here. So poieso, everybody. So I will do. I will make. And then play ra is an omicron contract vowel. What will it do before sigma? Lengthen to omega. Everybody play roso. Play roso. I will fill or I will fulfill. So that's our contract verb phenomenon. All right. We all good here? Okay. Let's take a look at how to form future middle, or as Mounce describes some of these forms, future deponent indicative verbs. The basics here are actually all the same as what we've already seen for the future active, except for this. Okay? I'm going to use the same stem as I used for future active. So I use the future active stem for my future middles. Notice that what we said before, when a verb is middle, is the subject performing the action? Yes. And that is true in the active voice too. Okay? So the future active and the future middle are both using the future active stem. They're just going to use different endings here. Okay? Same tense formative that I'm going to add to the future active stem, same connecting vowels, but instead of using the primary active personal endings, I'm going to use the primary middle passive personal endings. So let's take a look at this form. I have lu, sa, me, tha. Lu, sa, me, tha. Future active stem, lu. Sigma tense formative for future. Connecting vowel is omicron before moos and news. And then here, metha is my primary middle passive personal ending. And which person and number? First person plural. So remember, in the prior example, I had almost the same thing except lu, sa, men, which was the first person plural primary active ending. Okay? Here it's the primary middle passive first person plural ending. So lu, sa, me, tha. This is the bottom column or bottom quadrant of your personal endings chart that we were looking at. So here's how the forms will look. Lu, 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 for the future active stem, tense formative, sigma, all the way through, omicron and epsilon, and then we're using the mai-sai-tai endings, everybody. Mai-sai-tai, methistei-ntai. All right. And the good news is that the real personal endings are visible in every situation except for that second person singular form. What happened there? Let's walk through that real quickly, because that does not look like anything discernible. Something irregular. Okay, so it should have been lu-si. I'm sorry. It should have been lu-si. Sorry about that. Lu-si. So I've got missing sigmas here. Okay, so lu-si becomes lu-se-I. That is to say, this intervocalic sigma after the connecting vowel drops out. That leaves me with lu-e-I, or lu-se-I, and then epsilon and alpha are going to contract, and they will become eta. Remember that rule? When epsilon meets an alpha first, the epsilon wins and becomes the long version of the epsilon, which is an eta. When alpha gets there before epsilon, it contracts and becomes a long alpha. Okay, so this is the rule we're seeing here. So lu-a-e, and then this iota, now after a long vowel will subscript. Okay, so there's basically 4 steps here. Sorry about my mistake. I can't believe I left the most important part of the chapter out, which is the sigma tense formative. So lu, si, lu, I, lu, I, and then lu, a with the iota subscript. Those are the steps. Okay? Let's read the forms together. We'll start with the luo form, and then we'll look at peruamai in the future as well. Peruamai, I go, proceed, live. Okay, everybody, lusamai, luse, lusatai, lusamtha, luseste, lusantai. So, because luo has active forms, to put it in the future middle would be to add some kind of middle nuance where the subject acts and at the same time is affected by the action in some way. Many people would translate these middle forms as something like I will loose for myself, although that's wooden and stilted and not always exactly what the middle means. Okay, now here, peruamai, the lexical form is peruamai. This verb does not have an active formation at all. So Mounce calls this a deponent verb because it doesn't have an active set of endings. So to form the future, it also uses just the middle forms. There are no active forms for it. So everybody, perusamai, I shall go. Peruse, you will go. Parusatai is he, she, it will go. Parusamatha, we will go or we shall go. Parusiste is y'all will go. And parusantai, they will go. All right, so that's how you form the future active and future middle indicative. Not too hard, is it? Okay, let's take a look at the future tense of the verb to be. You've learned the present. Me, a, estin, esmen, este, esin, right? Now here's how we say future tense I will be or I shall be. Everybody, esamai, este, esse, estai, esamatha, esesthe, and esantai. Do you see the sigma here before the connecting vowels? That's future, okay? That's future. And did you notice that the endings are the middle passive endings? See that? So in the future, we're using middle passive endings. Whereas in the present, which forms did I use? I used the primary active endings, didn't I? Okay, so in the future, I'm using the primary middle passive. Is it possible to make the verb to be passive in any meaningful way? I was wased. I was beed. I was been. No, we can't do that, right? So here's the hard truth of the matter. In the present stem, certain verbs have only middle forms and not active forms. Mounce calls them deponent in the present stem. That does not mean that in the future they will be likewise deponent. Sometimes they will and sometimes they won't. And the reverse is true. Sometimes in the present tense, I will see active forms, and in the future, they will be middle only and not active. Okay? So you have to learn, and you will, which stems have forms that Mounce calls deponent, that use only middle or middle passive endings. Okay? This concept of deponency, as it were, or middle only forms, is a sort of a traveling concept, and it travels with the tense stems. All right. Let's go on to the principal parts of verbs. Sometimes our Greek tools, like our grammars, glossaries, are going to provide principal parts of the verb. The principal parts are the 6 verb forms that are provided for you usually in a columnar layout, and those 6 forms will be in the first person singular form, and they are supposed to be in these tenses. Okay, the present active, and these are all indicative, by the way. The present active indicative, future active indicative, aorist active indicative, which is one of the past tense forms, the perfect active indicative, the perfect passive indicative, and the aorist passive indicative. Okay, so I've laid it down from top to bottom, but if you look further, you'll see that this is really the way it's going to be laid out, usually from left to right. So first column, present active, second column, future active, and so forth. Now, why do the grammars provide us with things called principal parts? Well, they are helpful to know how to form the different tenses because each tense uses a tense stem. How are you going to find the basic stem for something like the future tense? Well, what you do, if you want to know what it is you go to the principal parts chart and you find your future active indicative column, which is column number 2. And to find the stem, you strip away personal endings, connecting vowels, and if it's one of the tenses that augment, you strip away the augment, and then you're left with your stem. So tense formatives, connecting vowels, personal endings, all have to go bye-bye. Okay? So if you take a look at gnosko, if I want to know what's the future stem, I get rid of my, get rid of the connecting vowel, get rid of the tense formative, and gno is my future active stem. What do you know about that? Gnosko, on the other hand, once I drop the personal ending and connecting vowel, the present stem is not gno, but rather gnosk. Gnosk. So you can tell that the present stem and the future stem are very different from each other. Well, they're sort of different from each other. They're not so different that you can't see how they're connected to each other. On the other hand, if you look at akuo and akuso, once I drop my personal endings, connecting vowels, and tense formatives, I'm left with aku for my future stem and aku for my present stem. Here, these two stems are identical to each other, aren't they? So like I said, sometimes your stems in the different tenses are the same, sometimes they're different. And knowing or having a principal parts chart is helpful to you because you can see at a glance where we have tenses with stems where the stem has been modified in such a way that it's sometimes hard to recognize that it belongs to that particular verb. Sort of like in English. In English, what are the different forms of the verb to go? Well, I have verbs like, let's see, I go. Then I can say I went. I could say I have gone, right? And I am going. So if I wanted to identify the principal parts of the verb to go, I could go to the different tenses and see the different forms and realize, okay, those are the forms that are used to produce all, in effect, all of the English verb forms that relate to going. Well, it's not very predictable that went is going to be one of the principal parts of to go because went doesn't look anything like go. There's no way to imagine how this somehow morphs into went. So what happened here? Well, the English language just borrowed a completely different verb form to get the past tense for to go. All right? They went over and said, hey, there's this verb called to wend, and we'd like you to come be our past tense. Okay? The past tense of wend is went, like lend and lent, right? So, you wouldn't know that unless somebody gave you principal parts if you were learning the language, you know, as not a native language speaker of English. If you're a native speaker, then you will have already learned that just because people use it all the time. Okay? We're not native Greek speakers, so using charts like this can be very helpful for us. Now, what I want to do is just ask you to think with me through some of these questions here. So, based on what we've just looked at, what is the present stem of akuo? It's aku. Okay? Aku. I'm not going to put the breathing marks. What's the future active stem of akuo? It's aku as well. Very good. What's the present stem of gnosko? Gnosk. What's the future active stem of gnosko? Gno. Good. Are either of these verbs middle only or deponent in the present active? So take a look at your forms. This is supposed to be the present active, which means I should be seeing active endings. Do you see active endings here? Omega is active, right, for first singular? Those are the present active endings for first singular? Yes? Okay, so neither of them are middle only in the present. Okay, so the answer is no. Are either of these verbs middle only in the future active? Yes. Take a look. Now, over here, I have akuso. That is definitely an active ending, and it's in the future active column, so that's very normal, isn't it? But I also have a verb that has a my ending in what's supposed to be the future active column. And that's not an active ending. That's a middle passive ending. Okay? So gnosko is the one that is middle only here. Okay, so the answer is yes, and it's gnosko. All right, how would you parse gnosomai? And then how would we translate it? That's, I guess, even more important. So, looking at the sigma, what does that tell you? It's future, okay, and it's middle. And if you want to put deponent in parentheses, okay, future, middle, or future, middle, deponent. Okay, and it's indicative, right? Okay, and then my tells you it's first singular. How am I going to translate gnosomai? I will gno. I will gno. Yeah, so that's it. I will know. It's going to feel very active in its meaning, isn't it? It does not mean I will be known. It is I will know. I will know. Yes, was there a question?
Does that have connotation of like I will know myself, or is it just a general like I will know?
No, like I will know something. I will know a fact. Okay, so let me stop there, and we'll take a quick break. Okay?
Really quick.
By the end of class, I will know.
Yes, exactly.
So, how would you say I will be known?
Okay, so we have a future passive, and there's an aorist active and a future active, an aorist passive and a future passive tense coming, and they're going to use a different stem and different tense formatives.
Slow down. We'll get there.
Yeah, we will get there. Okay, great.